A little while ago I published a video where I shared some tips about how to shoot in harsh light. That video was very popular, many of you found it useful, so thank you ever so much first of all for supporting that video and watching it. Now there are a few more things that I did leave out of that video, and this is going to be a part 2 that builds on top of that initial how to shoot in harsh light video. So if you haven't seen that yet, go and watch that first. I've linked it down below, and then come back to this video because everything will make a little bit more sense. Not sure how this is gonna... Why did I do this? Okay, now a very quick recap as to why I would even consider shooting during the midday harsh light when everyone else bangs on about golden hour. The reason is simple, and that's life. Most people are not full-time YouTube photographers that have the entire day to themselves with no real responsibilities other than to take photos, and going out at sunrise or sunset every single day or even multiple times a week is just not realistic for most people because of jobs, kids, family, life, as I've said. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if you're traveling, you might not always have the luxury of getting up in the morning. Maybe you don't arrive in a particular place until lunchtime. What are you going to do, just sit around and not do anything? Also not realistic. And finally, if you're like me, you just hate waking up early in the morning, and that's a good enough reason in itself. I remember when I first started photography, I kept getting told that if you're shooting during the day and the sun's out, you need to considerably underexpose your photos, and I never knew why, because whenever I did that they came out really muddy and dark. However, even if you shoot at the correct, let's say 0 exposure, you would probably find that the photos that you get in Lightroom will be quite a bit darker than what you saw in real life. So the first tip is actually to increase the exposure and brightness when you're editing. Now you can do it in camera. Personally, I would advise against it for the simple reason is you don't want to clip your highlights. And by shooting at your normal exposure, or even minus 0.3 if it's extremely harsh, you will protect those highlights a tiny bit. Now don't go below that because you'll just get a muddy image, but as long as you stick to 0 minus 0.3, you should be fine. However, when you get it into Lightroom, just increase the brightness or the overall exposure of the image, usually by plus 0.6 stops or even plus 1 stop depending on where you are. And because you're doing it in editing, you can control your highlights, shadows, blacks, whites a lot more, therefore ensuring you don't blow everything out. So as you see on the screen right now, the image which has the correct exposure looks a little bit dark, whereas the image where I've increased the exposure in editing looks a lot more realistic and a lot more true to life compared to the first example. If you're in a particularly high contrast environment, try to just go abstract. So if you have loads of, let's say, patches of light within a darker area, rather than trying to expose for everything, just think, you know what, this will be more abstracty, silhouette-y type photos. There is nothing wrong with that, and all you're doing is you're working with the scene and you're working with the light that you have. So put your camera either into highlight priority mode, or if it doesn't have it, let's say spot metering, where you can place a single point on the highlight and expose for the highlights and create these abstract silhouette-y type images. Now they might not be what you hoped to get from that particular location, but at least it's something. And honestly speaking, when you have an album from a particular trip, having a few of these abstract-y photos can break the rest of the images up quite nicely, in my opinion. In most cases, auto white balance does a fantastic job at getting the correct white balance. However, what I found when shooting, especially more scenic images of a cityscape or a landscape or just the entire environment during harsh light, is that the image will usually be a bit too cool. Now, it might be the correct white balance for the scene, but it just doesn't look as appealing. So what I found is by actually warming up the image a little bit, it just makes it look a bit more pleasant and less cold and just less sterile compared to the correct white balance. Sometimes you might be able to add a little bit of green to the image as well, but this you really need to be careful because it's so easy to overcook. In most cases you probably won't even do that. However, just increase the warmth of the image a little bit, and as you can see, the difference in my opinion is more pleasing, and yeah, just a better image and a better look, let's just say. As we spoke about in the last video, having loads of detail and loads of things in your image can make a already harsh looking image look even harsher, and that's because of how light hits all of the different subjects and elements within the photo when it's coming straight down, therefore giving it a harsher appearance. So as well as minimizing distractions, like I said previously, also when you're in editing, try to not over sharpen or use positive clarity in your image. If anything, you want to remove sharpening and you want to add negative clarity. This will soften the image and it will remove the edge contrast that you get by applying clarity, therefore give an appearance of a softer image. If you own an f1.2 lens and all you do is shoot at f1.2, then this particular tip will probably make you wet your pants, and that is to just open the lens up a little bit. Now, I don't mean go crazy and shoot everything at f0.67 because it's just going to look stupid. Obviously use some taste, use some common sense, and only add a lot of depth of field or a lot of background blur, if the scene calls for it. However, just softening the background a little bit by opening the lens up will soften the image a tiny bit. As I've said, again, this is really important. Make sure there's still context between the background, foreground and the subject. Don't just blow everything out at f1, but just softening up a little bit does make a bit of a difference. Of course, if you're shooting on a harshly lit day, then shutter speeds and light can become an issue. Two things you can do is apply an ND filter or use an electronic shutter where it can go higher than a mechanical. Personally, I just throw an ND filter on simply because I'm doing video at the same time. It just makes more sense. However, if you have an X100V, for example, then you can just go into an electronic shutter mode and increase shutter speed. Well, I hope these tips will help you out a little bit, and now we're going to go out in Valletta in Malta, which is where I am right now, and do some photography. It is quite harsh outside now, but there is some cloud coming in and out, so I don't know what we'll get. Hopefully it'll be something interesting. Before we do that, I just quickly want to say this video is sponsored by myself. In my online store, I have a bunch of amazing products that will undoubtedly help you. The London Photography Guide is your go-to reference for photo spots in London, as well as general photography information. If you're a Fujifilm shooter, I have a wide selection of camera guides to help you get the most out of your gear. All photos that you see in this video and everywhere else are edited using my presets. And finally, I also publish digital travel photography zines from each location showcasing photos that I have not shared elsewhere, as well as the popular ones too. I've linked them all down below, so if you want to support me by picking one of them up, I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. With no further to say and do, let's go and take some photos around Valletta.